Well, I guess as little weight as my opinion would hold, I suppose I should put my 2 cents in. I don't think it's become a secret to anybody about the current state of Helldivers 2. As of making this video, Helldivers 2 stands at a recent mixed overall rating, still maintaining its positive rating, but I've seen some players change their reviews from positive to negative. And after looking back at some of the previous updates, this doesn't surprise me at all. Everyone has been over the moon about every single issue that has been plaguing Helldivers 2, mostly since the recent update, ranging from instability in performance, to weapon, and poor enemy balancing. We saw this during and after the Escalation of Freedom update, where it basically all came front and center for the devs when the reviews went massively negative. Mostly ranging from all of the odd and stupid balance changes, some of which still plague the game to this day. Still can't fathom why they decided to add armor penetration to a flamethrower. And yeah, we're seeing it again. We're seeing a wash, rinse, repeat of what was happening prior to the 60 days patch. And I'm gonna go over a couple of the highlights that I think people seem to be complaining about the most. The game is unstable and crashes frequently, mostly on the bot front. The game is poorly optimized, especially on PC, where it is 131 to 135 gigabytes, compared to the 36 gigabytes on PlayStation and Xbox. And even according to some people on console, it still runs poorly. Some of the weapons don't feel as viable as the other ones, and some primaries even perform better than the support stratagems that they're compared to. I think the recent grenade tier list we made is a pretty good example of this, as if you go on helldive.live, you'll find that thermites remain on top of the most picked grenades overall, highlighting one of the many problems found with throwables, as well as primaries and other secondaries and other weapons that people use. I'm gonna touch on it here before getting into it later on the hypocrisy known as meta busting. And with that, poor weapon imbalancing that the developers have seemed to be so intent on doing recently. It's more of a lesser complaint to people that just run the same loadout on most fronts, of which I'm guilty of that, but it's pretty depressing to see that so many interesting concepts for weapons are fresh for a few seconds, but either fail to stack up against already existing primaries, or secondaries, or other support stratagems. Of course, there are a few exceptions to this rule, mainly the Coyote, as it's basically the middle finger to every other assault rifle, even with low damage and questionable ammo economy. But there are a lot of weapons that fit this description of being worse than primaries that they're based off of. Like the Epoch. I still have no clue why this gun was added to the game, other than to be a worse version of the Purifier or Scorcher. In fact, this weapon doesn't even tell the truth sometimes, as the weapon demonstration straight up lies to the player. If you want to take it a step further, you could theoretically say that most of the war bonds that have come out recently don't really have good options. And I wouldn't blame you. Over time, I think that some of the war bonds that have okay-ish mid items will gradually get buffs that'll make them worth using over time, mostly because another 60-day patch is all but confirmed by Arrowhead, and it's highly likely that some of these mid to garbage tier items are gonna find new life again. Eventually, I think I'm gonna do more weapon analysis videos covering weapons like this to go alongside normal gameplay, but to make this point short, it's pretty ironic that for a group of devs that has said in the past, we don't like meta builds, pushing for such meta builds, it's just not a good look for your company. Another one of the most talked about issues outside of game stability and crashing, if you're one of the lucky few that doesn't have that issue yet, is enemy imbalancing. I think everyone and their mother have talked about how the burrowing strain, which I'm going to call the Urukai for the rest of this video, are poorly designed, poorly implemented, and as a result, are not very fun to fight. These guys, the Automaton Warstrider, the Isopod, and in a handful of instances, some medium enemies like the Elevated Overseer and Alpha Commander, I've started calling these guys forced loadout checks, as they force the player, or players, to strictly run weapons and stratagems just so that players won't have a bad experience on higher levels. Again, tying into the we don't like meta builds hypocrisy that Arrowhead loves to run with. Upon release, the Urukai were not fun to fight at all, if you were the host, as they had some weird latency issue through the spaghetti code that caused their attack speeds to be faster than you could react. They could also just jump out of the ground and teleport next to you. There was also an issue with damage, but I never found that issue because the only way around that was just slapping on heavy armor and ignoring all other types of armor. So, logically, you'd think Arrowhead would listen to the complaints, solve the host latency issues, and make the Urukai slightly easier to fight. No, they didn't. The latency problem was basically multiplied for every player in the lobby. So now, instead of one player getting screwed over by the attack speed and the bullshit hit registration, now it was everyone. Also gotta mention here that they can hide underground, and the only way you could force them up was with explosive weapons, mainly the crossbow or the purifier. So, again, deletes all logic and reasoning to use any other weapon that doesn't cause explosive damage. And here I'm going to talk about the armor. It didn't help that the Urukai also had enough power to pretty much one-shot people in light armor, do devastating damage to players in medium armor, basically taking half your health and breaking one of your limbs guaranteed, making it so the only way to avoid damage was to equip heavy armor. Even then, they'd still take out huge chunks of your health really quickly. And again, I'm talking at a level 10 to level 9 difficulty level. Even at lower levels of 8, 7, and in some cases level 6, although I don't think the Urukai spawned there, it got to a point where it was just borderline unplayable unless you followed a meta build. I'm going to avoid the Bile Dragon in the room, because that is a whole different ballgame of shitty game design and lying from the developers. Who knows? Maybe they're not functioning as intended and shooting their wings is actually supposed to do damage? I guess we're never gonna know. So now I'm going to move on to the reason I call these enemies forced loadout checks. The Warstrider. As my first interaction with these guys was outside of being ragdolled continuously, yelling out the question of, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Out loud every time one of these guys started shooting at me or launching grenades. Did I mention that these guys have medium turrets for guns? You know, the ones that the devs nerfed because they ragdolled you or two-tapped you from across the map? I thought they learned their lesson from not only that, but also Hulks having them at the end of 60 days patch. Even though I've never had any issues with the Hulks, because usually you could cross-map them before they cross-mapped you. Now, Warstriders wouldn't be an issue in my opinion, but I think there's a couple of problems with these guys. Remember the forced loadout check that I keep mentioning? The only weak spot that most stratagems can use are the waist and leg joints. These joints have high health. And you know what that means? The only support weapons that can one-shot them consistently are the Eat, the Commando, the Recoilless Rifle, the Quasar Gun, the Spear, and the Wasp. as well as other sentries. But let's go down this further. The Spear and Wasp are powerful, but the DPS is kind of inconsistent. Powerful, but inconsistent. Sentries on the bot front are usually better for aggro drawing and dealing with smaller groups of enemies. So if you're fighting the War Strider one-on-one, it's a fair fight. This means the only consistent ways of taking down a War Strider quickly, in my experience, are Recoilless Rifle, Eat, Commando, and the Quasar Gun. And I'll note here that this is just my experience, as even when War Striders aren't spawning, I still find myself using the Quasar Cannon too frequently, because to be frank, it's one of the only good support weapons on that front, outside of the Railgun. Then there's the issue of the Illuminate front, which is just a travesty of unbalanced mishmashing. On one hand, you have perfectly designed, yet still slightly buggy implementations of voteless hordes, which are ruined by the flesh mobs, who are still way too tanky, and again, fall into the play of forced loadout checks. But they are nothing when compared to the Leviathan. Glazed divers will love to say, oh, they're not hard to deal with. Just cope and use a recoilless rifle. How can I cope when they can cross-map snipe me with no counterplay? Even with heavy fortified armor, they can still one-shot you before you can even think of taking them out. And even if you want to take them out, you have to gear your entire loadout, or your team's entire loadout, around taking out the Leviathan, which is almost impossible to do without proper communication or in a public lobby. It's here that I'm going to mention at least one last thing. Why don't we get to see what enemy sets certain missions are going to have? I'm not talking like, this planet has the Predator strain type shit. I mean this planet has bile spewers, and those little jumpy shits that cause the mortar sentry to kill me. Stuff like that would make the player have more planning on how the mission's gonna play out. And in some instances, it makes the difficulty feel forced. So now I'm going to address the metaphorical elephant in the room here. The stability of the game and its servers has plummeted. To put it lightly, since the Unjust update, for some people, the game has basically become unplayable, with near constant server crashes, lagging with constant freezing, or the game just straight up kicking you out. I've been a victim of this myself. In fact, I've noticed it's more common to occur on the bot front than the other two fronts. I wish I could give a logical explanation as to why, but if I had to chalk it up to two things: one, the spaghetti code that this game is on, mostly paired with an outdated engine and questionable design choices, and every time the devs seem to try and fix a game-breaking crash, they end up breaking more of their code, resulting in further spaghettification, which results also in poor server connection as well. It's here that I'm gonna add that I fixed my end by forcing a direct connection instead of a Wi-Fi connection to my PC, resulting in faster speeds. But even then, that's just an issue I had on my PC end. While I've been able to get the run to game with significantly less freezing, that's only if I am the host. If someone else is the host, usually I'm crashing, or getting a network error, or freezing. Or sometimes, even when I'm the host, it just disconnects at random. I wish I had a better solution, but I don't. I guess if there's something that could conclude these past few calamity-ridden weeks, it can be that we've entered into a Sisyphusian cycle with the developers of Helldivers 2. We had this happen prior to the 60 days patch, where player numbers basically plummeted from the poor design choices, and now that's happening again. During the height of Xbox deployment and into the Unjust, this game was hitting over 500,000 players. Now, according to Helldivers2Galaxy.com, there's only an average of about 145,000 players in total. That's pretty terrible. Even factoring the consideration of people who just eventually got bored of the game, that's a pretty big drop-off of players. So what would I review for this game? So, final words I'm gonna put forth. I personally still enjoy this game. I think it is, and still has the potential to be one of the best games ever made. I have sunk countless hours into fighting missions from Ustotu to Oshane. And while I have not been there for the Golden Age, where the game was first being discovered, when we were getting our ass handed to us at the creek, there is still magic to be discovered here. But it's just buried by poor choices and horrible mistakes from the developers. And that's what my last statement's going to be directed towards. On the rare, super rare chance that one of them is watching, listen to your community. Not the glazed divers, or glizzy gladiators, as I've heard people call them. Not the tryhards who only grind 9s and 10s. Listen to the community. As at the end of it all, that's the only reason this game is going to continue to live on after what's said and done. Other than that, I don't have anything left to add. So, these have been my 2 cents.